So we'll be back again with Matt Piepenburg and myself. Today, Matt, I thought we'd just have a quick word about the coronavirus. You know, it's quite a controversial subject from the medical point of view. Of course, the economic consequences are much more easy to talk about. But you know, it's so inconsistent the way that every country treats it differently, interprets it differently. You know, Germany, for example, uses the CRP test in a different way and uses a lot less cycles, I've learned, than the other countries, which means that they're not getting the same positive results because they consider that their result is more correct than the ones that other countries are using. So that's another point again, that there is no consistent line, and of course the WHO have totally lost the credibility here by not having a strict policy or a line to follow. You have read about this quite a lot, and I think you have some specific views, Matt, on this.
Yeah, I was looking at a resolution that came out by the American Institute of Economic Research, and I spoke with them in a couple interviews last week, and they had what's called the Great Barrington Resolution, where they brought a number of epidemiologists and experts, which again, you and I are not, and we're not here to give medical advice or viral advice, but they did get into some of the facts and some of the numbers. And it's worth kind of talking about that briefly here. And again, with a strong caveat that we're not trying to be callous about reducing human lives to data points and comparing human lives to economic data. But nevertheless, these are important topics, and it's helpful to at least put it into perspective without at all, again, trying to appear callous or expert-like in what the ramifications are. But one of the things, Egon, that came out was keeping this, and again, this is economists talking, so I want to be very sensitive, but looking at the data that we have from the World Health Organization and the CDC, or Center for Disease Control, and the numbers that we know of, at least as of last week, these numbers change every day, but I'm talking real back of the napkin math here. There's a global population of 7.8 billion. There are 41 million people who have contracted the COVID virus, and there are about 1 million deaths worldwide to date. And what that means based on pure math, in terms of the number of people infected and the number of fatalities, we're talking about a fatality rate of just under or just over 2.4%, which means just about 98% of those who contract COVID have not succumbed or died from the disease. And again, not trying to reduce the importance of those who have and the people that have lost loved ones, but its mortality rate is just about 2.4%. In terms of the global population, the infection rate is just under a half, or just over, excuse me, 0.5%. And in terms of the global population, the death toll is 0.003%. Again, not trying to say this is a minimal issue. Nobody we know, or ourselves included, want to catch COVID. We're certainly not against masks and distancing policies and careful policies. But in the grand perspective, looking at this numerically, on a health issue, it certainly isn't the Black Plague. And again, I'm not trying to minimize that. But what we also have to keep in mind is economic data isn't just raw data, it impacts lives. When economies go down or unemployment goes up by even a percentage point, people do die. Pension funds, houses are lost, jobs are lost, psychological disorders rise. So there's a much bigger issue here at play, but we do know quantifiably in the US that over 40 million jobs have been lost since COVID. We know that 3.3 million businesses have shut down, and 40% of Black-owned businesses are now out of business. So there are economic ramifications to the policy reactions. And again, not trying to be callous about comparing economics to human lives, but I do think it's important to put those numbers out there in the grander perspective. What I'd like to talk to you about, Egon, though, when you look at those clear economic damages, which you and I do have more expertise on than virologists or epidemiologists or policymakers. We're certainly not politicians or health experts. But from an economic perspective, when you look just at the US and Europe and the number of jobs lost, the number of shutdown ramifications, the unemployment numbers, and of course the debt numbers, this has to be paid for at some point. And we really, Egon, how is this going to be paid for? We kind of know the answer, but what really is the result of these data points we're looking at financially?
Well, you know, we both know that, you know, that the powers that be and the central banks and governments were a bit lucky from their point of view with coronavirus, because it gave them an excuse to print the money that they actually needed to print anyway, because the financial industry and the markets were, and the financial system was under a tremendous pressure since August, September last year, which we knew when they started with a bit flooding the market with liquidity. Yep. So basically, the coronavirus has accelerated the money printing that would have happened anyway, but of course, it's made it a lot worse. As you said, many industries are actually now closing down. You take the whole of the leisure industry, as we both know. The travel, airlines, hotels, etc. I mean, it's a catastrophe. Yeah. But on the other hand, you've got some industries that are still doing very well. And I just saw the other day that, for example, Volkswagen, they're saying that they need no more support. So the car industry seems to be recovering very well. Yeah. But overall, of course, that there are lots of businesses suffering, and that's on top of a financial system which is under pressure because we've been looking at debts building up for years and decades, and also the US is making continuous deficit and have done for 90 years. So that all puts pressure on the printing presses, and so we're not going to pay for it. Nobody can afford to pay for it. So there's only one way to pay for it, sadly, which is just more money printing. I mean, it sounds like such a simplistic answer to a complex question. But the problems are going to get worse. Now, we talked about before, you and I, we might get this, the money printing might create an inflationary short-term boom in the next 9-12 months or so, when markets go up and everybody is a bit optimistic. So it seems like it's working, the money printing. But as we both know, the effect of printing more money is actually negative in the long run, because you can't create wealth by more money, and you can't solve the debt problem by more debt. So therefore, we will just, the way I read it is that we first will have a potential, a benefit from the world, a benefit which is not real from the money printing, and then eventually, of course, you will have an implosion. So sadly, we're going to just see more of the same, and every country in the world is now actually deteriorating when it comes to COVID, and we're seeing lockdowns in France, virtually in the UK, and also in most European countries. So it's a catastrophe. It really is for the world. Now. Yeah. Of course, everybody's talking about ways of solving the monetary system, the financial system, and of course the IMF has been talking about new Bretton Woods, and we're talking central banks are all central banks are talking about now issuing digital currencies. Of course, we know that that's just another form of fiat money. Nevertheless, what is your views about these moves that are taking place?
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, tucked in the corner of the IMF website is a very carefully planned and very euphemistically heavy new idea that the IMF is calling the new Bretton Woods. And just for a 20-second history lesson, in 1944, the old Bretton Woods was formed to basically, as the US emerged from World War II as the strongest power, other countries decided to back their currencies against the US dollar, which at that time was backed by gold. So it was an indirect way of having a gold-backed global currency, which was the US dollar. Of course, Nixon welched on that in 1971. And what the IMF is calling for is a new global currency, a new Bretton Woods. They literally use the word new Bretton Woods. They used a lot of bad math to justify. But what it boils down to, Egon, is from the IMF's perspective is, at some point, and they're using COVID as the pretext, but we know that these problems existed long before COVID. But at some point, due to the increased debt demands and needs and the liquidity needs based on the COVID crisis, that the new solution the IMF is putting forth is a new Bretton Woods, which involves some type of government central bank cryptocurrency backed in part by gold. But when you get all the details aside, it's worth looking at that IMF video called The New Bretton Woods. But when you get past all the fancy language, really what it comes down to, as you said, a new currency and a new debt solution to an old debt problem. It's really, and I hate to be so simplistic, it's really no different than if you have one credit card that's maxed out, you get another credit card and start over again and try to pay the old bill with the new bill. It's a solution that's nothing new. It's just a new form of currency and more debt. And again, we both and many of our listeners and informed investors see through this, but it is just another attempt by a major bank to use an old definition of sanity to create more insanity, the same solution to the same problem that isn't working. And my question back to you, Egon, in the last couple minutes, because I don't want to take this too long, is look, we both know projections are silly and predictions and timing is silly. We see the bad weather coming. We know there's an umbrella needed, but looking 3 to 5 years out, Egon, this IMF plan or some version of it or whatever new currencies or new debt or new policies that come out of these banks and these large global banks, we know how it kind of ends. Do you think it's even worth trying to time this 3 to 5 years out? Can they keep extending and pretending, creating more currencies to buy unwanted debt, to at least keep risk asset markets alive? Or do you see that bending or breaking even before the next 3 to 5 years, if that's a fair question?
Well, looking back at history, it seems like central banks and governments can fool some other people most of the time, but they will fail with fooling everybody all of the time. Now they have been very good at it, and if you take since 2006-9, when the financial markets almost collapsed worldwide, we are here now 10, 11 years later, and the world is still standing, and there is perceived prosperity all around, especially the rich are getting richer, which is and the poor are getting poorer, but they're not always aware of it because they think that the printed money it will work, and it works short term. But it, of course, at some point the return on additional funds, or the diminishing return on additional printed money, whether it's called digital or a new Bretton Woods or whatever it is, I mean, it doesn't matter what it is all printed or fiat money, and it's an artificial system, not based on real production, real labor, etc., but all on central banks creating the money. So therefore, it's not going to last. So now, we've written a few articles about this recently. My last article, which is called "Lift Off and Collapse," I forecast that, as I just mentioned, that we will see probably out of this money printing that is taking place now to try to save the world, we will see an inflationary liftoff, which is very often the case, especially in inflationary and hyperinflationary periods or eras, where initially, you will have stock markets booming and economy has a perceived improvement because of all this money coming in, but eventually it all turns. So initially we might get, as I said, 6 to 18 months of markets moving up rapidly, and people thinking that the bad times are over, and probably that will be also linked to obviously a slowdown of the coronavirus spreading around the world, and because that a lot of people forecast that we would have this second wave, and the winter is the worst for that, but probably next spring it will slow down again, and therefore we could see some optimism coming back, but that will be very short-lived. It could be 6 months or a bit longer, and we'll have a temporary market euphoria, and thereafter I think we are going to see markets turning down again because of the sheer level of debt that we're going to see. That is obviously will never be repaid and can't be financed either. But the reason why the economy will turn down is, of course, like in every inflationary, hyperinflationary event, is the currencies falling due to all the printing. And when the currencies collapse, then we will see inflation, hyperinflation. We'll see interest rates going up, and then the economy turning down. So what is the timing? It's a mug's game to try to forecast exactly how it's going to happen. I mean, I have I'm not going to try, but I would. My view is, Matt, that this could be. We are now in a year's time or a year and a half. We're getting into the inflation is starting, and then we're getting into hyperinflation eventually. And we will have a period of could it be 5 years when things are going to deteriorate on a continuous basis? I don't think after 5 years it's going to stop. It's just that maybe the fall will stop, fall of markets, fall of the economy, and then we'll go along the bottom for maybe 10 years or longer when things are not going to improve. They're just going to stabilize. I mean, both in markets and in the economy, they're just going to stabilize. I mean, what's your view on that? Do you?
Yeah, look, I agree with you. It's a monk's game to try and forecast timing. I think whenever and however, I think it is an inflation rate driven end to this debt binge, this debt keg party, as I like to call it. I think like you though, however, whenever that does occur, the fallout will be much like the post 89 Nikkei, where you'll see a long period of low growth and not a return or a V-shaped recovery. But I'll close to make this short that I agree with you that we know how it ends. We know it will end. To try and time it is irrelevant at this point. It's being prepared that is key. And just tracking rates and tracking inflation and tracking common sense, which is what we do. And of course, one of the key ways to be prepared is precious metals. Again, all rivers point back to that, but I'll spare us both the embarrassment of trying to predict within months or years exactly when that will happen. The key is seeing the storm clouds ahead and getting the right umbrellas. And I think we can close with that, Egon, and we'll have a heck of a lot more to talk about in the coming weeks. But I think looking at the COVID data, looking at the economic data without being callous or indifferent to the human cost is an important thing to do right now as lockdowns kick in again here in Europe.
Yeah, that's true. So, as you say, we might get a temporary boom in markets. The risk is massive, but the areas where people should protect themselves is the commodities, which are going to benefit from this, and especially, of course, precious metals.
Yep.
And investors should be very careful. We're in for a very tough period, even if markets short term might boom generally. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for today. We'll leave it at that, and
okay.
we'll speak soon again.
Okay, Egon.
All right.
Looking forward
Thanks.
to it.